Thank you all for joining us for this month's installment of Wild at Work, a Stewardship series. Today we have Mr. Thomas Janke, the Texas State Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, joining us. Thomas will be discussing how prescribed fire can be used as a tool for better managing lands in Texas. We do ask that our participants remain muted with their cameras off throughout the remainder of the presentation. If there are any questions, feel free to use the chat feature on Zoom, and we'll have a chance to tackle some of those questions here at the end of the presentation. Thomas, with that, I'll go ahead and hand the reins off to you. Folks, if you do have any questions, like I said, you can use the chat feature. It looks like we already have a one chat in there. Thomas, if you want to share your screen, you can take over the sharing from me. And hopefully everyone's able to see that. Thomas, I can see your screen just fine now.
Perfect. Well, I do appreciate it, Jared. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine, and hopefully all of our participants can as well.
Well, thank you very much. Jared, so from my side of things, I'm not able to see the chat. It might be easiest to hold any questions till the end, but if you see anything in the chat suggesting people can't hear me or see slides moving, please bring it to my attention and we'll adjust as we need to.
Yeah, I certainly will. I'll monitor the chat throughout the presentation and let you know if anything comes up.
I appreciate it. Well, with that, Jared, I just want to thank you and Texas Wildlife Association for this opportunity. I know you and I have been discussing this for a little while now, and you know, like everything in life, just there's too many irons in the fire per se, but really appreciative of this opportunity and what a day to be doing it. I'm sitting here at my house and home office and near Gould Busker in southern Coleman County, and we are very blessed to have an overcast, drizzly day today. So definitely no fire happening in this part of the world, but setting us up nicely. So hopefully in the future we can be burning more. But I'll be talking more about that in a little bit. But Jared gave me this opportunity when we first talked and said, "Hey, I know you have a background in fire, and I know that a lot of the work that either your organization does or that the partners you work with deal with fire as a land management tool, and thought it'd be great to bring that to y'all's attention." And so there's a lot of things we could talk about pertaining to fire, and there's not enough time in this session to really go into great detail about any specific thing. So I just want to preface with this is going to be a really kind of high level, really broad spectrum overview of fire and in Texas, and considerations to have, and a lot more conceptual than it is going to be about specifics. So with that, we'll get started. When making this presentation, you know, I had to ask myself, you know, what makes Texas important to you? And I think that's going to vary, but some of the things that came to my mind, you know, be it our lakes and rivers, or the fish we enjoy, the various wildlife, the ranching, the agriculture, you know, the festivities and the culture, the industry per se. But you know, some of my favorite things are going to be those view sheds and just having that back 40, whatever that may mean to you, your own little slice of heaven. And as you know, whether you have a quarter acre or you have a 250,000 acres, you know, we have the blessing and ability to be stewards of God's creation. And it's really difficult to be proper stewards unless we best understand, you know, what resources we have that we're dealing with, and then also what is it that they need or that would be beneficial to them to best maximize their natural abilities, be it vegetation wise, wildlife wise, just everything that goes into that ecosystem. So, you know, with Texas being so big, again, we're going to really focus on concepts, and I'll show y'all why it'd be really hard to really nail this down for any particular part of the state. First of all, we're talking, you know, 150 plus million acres here in the state, and extremely blessed that have a really diverse set of ecoregions spanning from the Gulf Coast prairies and South Texas, Tamaulipas and thorn scrub, to our iconic, rolling hills of the hill country with the wildflowers and juniper, to the piney woods, to rolling plains, trans-pecos, etc. And so that has a lot of diversity of vegetation, topography, habitats, climate, you name it. There's a reason it has different vegetation communities and following suit different wildlife inhabiting it. For those not familiar with the state, here's a couple of pictures just to give you an idea. Far East Texas, we're talking, lots of forested areas. Gulf Coast, lots of water and potential grasslands. Deep South Texas, lots of potential brush. Hill country, again, that rolling topography, mix of juniper, mesquite, and other brush. Get up to the Panhandle, we have, historic rolling plains and mid to maybe even tall grass prairies. And then our Trans-Pecos, we get to part of the Chihuahuan Desert, a lot more arid ecosystem, a lot more topography. Just the state has a whole lot to offer. So when thinking of these, how do we best think about something such as prescribed fire? And it's like most biologists or natural resource managers are going to tell you, it's really going to depend. And a big determining factor of that is going to be rainfall. We're going to get into it later after a while about, considerations for burning and different things. But so much of our management decisions, be it burning, grazing, or other things, is going to be dictated by rainfall. What we have, what's to come, and what's kind of that hopeful annual expectation. And as you can see on this map here, there's definitely a gradient across our state. In deep East Texas, we have annual average precipitation of 55 inches or better. And then as we move west, that decreases to the point of talking around the El Paso area, typically less than 10 inches of rain. So that's a huge gradient on not only amount of rain they're getting and soil moisture, but how much vegetation that's going to grow. El Paso's not going to grow those forested areas like East Texas is going to be. And so there's differences there and considerations to have. Another challenge we have is a lot of people want to come to Texas, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something we got to keep in mind. This is a map that at that time, Institute of Renewable Natural Resources put together, now NRI, but just really talking about how much land conversion is happening. Basically, how much of our working lands, be it farmland, rangeland, etc., are being converted to development. Now, a big topic that likely is on your minds is not only urbanization, but also energy development, transmission lines, soil or solar, wind, etc. Those are all things that are, we have over 1,000 people moving to our state each and every day on average. And we are also at that same time losing about a section of land or 600 plus acres of land per day to development. So we're having more and more people come in. We're having less and less land to work with to create that food and fiber and resources that we all appreciate, desire, and need. So we have to be a lot smarter about how we're managing the land that we do have, so we can have clean water and clean air and food to provide not only for our state, but throughout the world. So taking a step back, and I'm going to, when I say a step back, I'm talking, pre-European settlement here. And then to the best of our scientific knowledge, what it was 100 plus years ago. One of the iconic species, I hear about, I'm sure many of you have heard about, is the bison and where they ranged in. And we could look at their whole range map across the U.S., but specifically talking about Texas, their historic range was I'd say 90+% of the state, minus maybe the Rio Grande Valley and Tamaulipan thorn scrub of deep South Texas. Another iconic species that we still have, but in a much smaller density and abundance, is our pronghorn antelope. Again, native to North America, and they historically ranged the western 2/3 of the state. So both of those are much different than they are now, but I simply bring those two up because both of those were wide-ranging animals that utilized much of our state and that required grasslands. So one of the things that suggests to me was, our state definitely looked different 100+ years ago. It didn't have near the shrub or tree densities that it does now. It had definitely more of those open rangelands or grasslands or savannas. And so that's going to play a contributing factor into, some of that fire as well. But as I just mentioned, what was that key component to allowing species such as bison or pronghorn to range and roam here across our state? And that's fire. Simply put, that's one of the things. The bison would follow the fire and follow those green ups following the rain. And but that was before we're setting fire. So how did that happen? Native Americans so intelligent and realized that fire was a necessity for many things, and they did it for not only keeping their areas healthy, but they found that that they used that to congregate the bison, to bring them in on those green up areas. They used it to reinvigorate some of the areas they not only wanted to hunt but harvest their products at, and also disease control, reducing ticks and other things that made just their quality of life better. But in addition to that is also just, God and lightning. And you think about that, when do we typically have some of the most severe, lightning strikes? Is that a particular time of year? And that may vary, but, if we're trying to mimic what the quote unquote historic fire regime may have been, we got to figure out, hey, when would this have naturally burned on its own? Is it when things are going to be lush and green? Is it going to be when things are completely dry? Is it going to be when you have a lot of crazy weather activity, such as dry lightning storms? And so it's going to depend across the state, but those are considerations to take in mind if we're going to try to replicate or bring back some of those some of the factors that our vegetation, our ecosystems evolved with. How do we best mimic that? And with both of these, they were not limited by roads or other things that would have that we put fires out for. They would have gone until either they ran out of fuel or they hit a barrier such as a river. They went on for miles and miles, thousands upon thousands of acres of fire. So it was just a different scale and concept back then. A research publication came out looking at carbon data and tree ring data and other things, and had an estimate across the U.S. on what that fire frequency or fire return interval was on average. And as you might guess, very much trends with that rainfall average. So just focusing on Texas, those darker red areas you see kind of along the Gulf Coast and up through the Blackland prairies, that was suggesting we were burning less than 3 years intervals, at least one fire every 3 years. And then the further west you go, it decreased to maybe one fire every 25 years, and that's far parts of West Texas. But aside from getting into the nitty gritty details about how often did an area burn or should it burn, just suggesting that, hey, nearly all of our state had a fire return interval and frequency, and that again, that vegetation, that ecosystem evolved with fire. So what changed? We don't see those pronghorn roaming across the state. We don't see, the bison either near to the scale that they historically were. Well, fencing was a big one. And with fencing came livestock, and depending on how those areas were managed and the conditions they were in, sometimes you get fence lines effects, such as that shown, where maybe you have a moderate or conservative stocking rate versus a very heavy stocking rate. And so even if you do want to burn, if you don't have fuel or vegetation to carry a fire, it's not going to burn. So if you're into looking for fire breaks and keeping wildfires from happening, or looking at a homemade golf course and not so much worried about the health of the land, well, that's an approach to do it. But again, we have a 1,000+ people coming to Texas. They're all wanting their slice of heaven too, and looking at where to live. So that urban sprawl is a big thing that continues to change. And then probably one of the best deterrents of fire and advertising things that have happened in the natural resource profession, good, bad, or ugly, has been Smokey the Bear. And just really getting it into people's mind that, not only do we need to prevent wildfires, but fire is not a good thing. And so after decades and decades of that successful advertising, now we're trying to work on better educating ourselves and educating others. How, why, and when is fire beneficial and crucial, especially to some dependent ecosystems on it? So, how much fire is happening in Texas? Well, the Texas A&M Forest Service regularly keeps up with some of the reported fire trends, and this one's slightly outdated, but not too far back. And back in 2019, there was a total of a little over 325,000 acres treated with prescribed fire here in Texas. And you can see the breakdown of those fires that happen on public lands versus private lands. And the reason I like this graph is, yes, Texas is 95+% privately owned. And so that's the bulk of our land, no question about it. But where are those efforts being made and had to use fire as a management tool? And you can see on some of the sidebars, of our 8.5 million acres of public land in 2019, a little over 2% were treated with prescribed fire. A lot of that being in Deep East Texas or in our national grasslands. And then the bulk of our land, 141 million acres of private working lands, we're talking about less than 0.1%. Not 1%, but less than 0.1% were treated with prescribed fire in 2019. So earlier I suggested that we know that Texas evolved to have fire at a regular basis, be it anywhere from every couple of years to every couple of decades, it was burning. But right now, we are nowhere on track with less than 0.1% to even come close to giving our vegetation and plant communities that component they need to be as healthy as possible. So I've used the word tools many times, and I'm sure many of you have heard these, but in case you haven't, Aldo Leopold is coined the father of wildlife management. And nearly a century ago, he had the wisdom and foresight to conceptualize and generalize 5 basic practices that really depleted our natural resource systems. And that was the axe, or just cutting down way too many trees or in a manner that wasn't sustainable, livestock, or the cow, and again, just abusing that resource and to the point of overgrazing and not resting and just changing those plant communities. The plow, really changing up, how much are we just uprooting things. And in Texas, I think about, root plowing, how common that was a half century ago. And now we're learning the repercussions of that, and how that some of those ecosystems just don't recover following a practice such as plowing, or probably more commonly, converting our rangelands into croplands. We all need food to eat, but are all areas suitable for farming, or should we have the mindset farm the best, conserve the rest? Fire, as we're talked about and going to continue talking about, and then hunting. But those 5 basic tools are what have really shaped our natural resource field. And when used to one extreme, they can be detrimental. All 5 of them can be. But when used to the other end of the spectrum, they can be beneficial. So not only can they be bad, but they can be good. And none of them are individual. They all go hand in hand in some matter and are part of the equation. And for those of you not familiar with it, if we were to have a barren piece of land, however big a size you want to think, and we just let it be, do what's going to happen, and let God and Mother Nature do their works, you'll find out that, one, Mother Nature does not like being a nudist. Something's going to pop up there, whether it's a quote unquote weed or some kind of forb, desirable or not. There's going to be something covering that ground. So the first things you're going to see in that primary succession are going to be your annual plants, your forbs, your flowers, and then your annual grasses, and that'll eventually be perennial grasses. And if you're in a part of the world that has enough rain and typically grows trees, you're going to start getting those mixed grassland woodlands, and then it's going to potentially be a climax community of a forest, in theory. And I simply bring that up because this is how our habitats were designed to go, from going from nothing to potentially a climax community of trees. But when you do a disturbance in there, such as fire, it has the ability to do basically an ecological reset. Depending on that intensity of fire, think about, you see on the news these catastrophic wildfires in California or other places out west. I mean, you're talking about going from a climax forested community to a moonscape. And unfortunately, that's what's shown on media, is that moonscape effect. What's typically not shown is what that habitat looks like in the next 5 or 10 years, when you start getting that regrowth, when you start now allowing sunlight and water to infiltrate the ground, and how that can best be used for wildlife management. So that's where this is all about. How do we best use fire and other things as tools to manipulate that successional stage and put it in a place that we want to best have for livestock or wildlife? So I like to tell folks, as a landowner, land manager, depending on what your land management goals are, that may very well be your ticket to figuring out how best do I use these tools, and what partners or funding organizations have similar interests that can help direct me in the path for those decisions, and maybe even have some financial assistance opportunities to go along with it, so I don't have to foot the entire bill. Before I really get into the fire part of it, I'm gonna give y'all a spoiler and give y'all 3 key points I want y'all to take away from this and to have throughout this presentation. And again, conceptually, proper habitat management and conservation is a process. It's not a practice. It's not a one and done. It takes time, and things change. We get different weather factors, we get different ownership, we get different goals, we get different markets. Things change, so we have to be dynamic and be willing to adapt. And it all takes planning. If we don't have a plan, we don't have a true goal of where we're going, how to get there, and really looking back about what we've accomplished. That all takes time and it all takes money. And then working with others may be able to help with various steps of that. And again, providing resource to help you along with your goals and be as successful as possible. So now getting into the nuts and bolts of fire, again, I mentioned wildfire earlier, and the first thing the media shows is the catastrophic part, kind of like that lower right picture shows. That's what sells on media. But fire is so much more than that. And this presentation is specifically about prescribed fire. So according to the Texas Outdoor Burning Code, prescribed fire is the controlled application of fire to naturally occurring or naturalized vegetative fuels under specified environmental conditions and confined to a predetermined area following appropriate planning and precautionary measures. Basically put, you have to have a reason and a purpose to burn. It's in a designated area under a designated prescription, just as if you were to go to the doctor and you have an illness or an ailment and they're going to prescribe you some kind of antibiotic or treatment or physical therapy in order to treat you or to help you out. It's exactly what this fire is doing. It's saying, hey, the land needs such and such under these conditions or parameters at this time of year in this amount, and that's the prescription. Quite a few folks, mistakenly use the word controlled burn. There's so many things we don't have control over in a fire, the biggest being the weather. And so when I hear controlled burn, maybe that's when you're burning a brush pile, but probably more realistically, that's when you're burning a trash barrel or something like that, where you can have a water hose standing directly by it and you're keeping it contained to that, that small area. That's typically a quote unquote controlled burn. And then wildfire, as you might guess, that's one that is not under prescription, that gets out of control. And usually it's burning under some of the hottest, driest, worst environmental conditions that allows it to spread rapidly. So now knowing about, the differences between those verbiages on fire, what does it take to do a prescribed fire here in Texas? Again, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty, but just know that, as a landowner, you have the right to burn. Yes, there are state laws that are dictated by the Texas TCQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And there's even some rules and regulations set forth by the Texas Department of Agriculture for certified insured prescribed burn managers. But they, and even at the county level, commissioners or judges can set forth burn bans if they so choose. So there's different things you need to be aware of and cognizant of, but just because there's a burn ban in place doesn't necessarily mean you're not allowed to burn. Again, you have the right as a landowner to burn, but sometimes you can ask for exceptions or allowances because those your prescription and the precautionary measures you've taken will fall in suit, or that's what you need, but it may not be what the judge or other people think is the most safe unless you got all your T's crossed and I's dotted. And then I just threw up there the National Wildland Coordinating Group, because depending on if you're working with any organizations or agencies, they may very well follow that protocol, and they have a set of rules that they have to follow on for their teams or their properties as well. I bring up with the prescribed burn, again, you have to, for it technically to be a prescribed burn, you have to have a plan. So what all does the Texas Department of Agriculture consider a necessity or a requirement to be in that plan? And one is going to be, what is your purpose of the burn? Why are you doing it? And then where is that burn going to be located and how do you get there? Basically, if emergency response has to get there, can the directions you give them get there? How many folks are needed for that burn to be safe to the best of your abilities? What are you burning? How big of an area are you burning? And then what weather parameters are you going to need? Wind direction, wind speed, humidity levels, ventilation rates for smoke. What all are you going to need for this fire to meet your goals and also stay within legal parameters? And then what are your oh crap plans? Let's say if it does get out, and it does happen, but it happens a lot less than most people think. Studies done by Oklahoma State University have suggested that escape fires, or those fires that get out unintentionally, happen less than 2% of the time, and it might even be less than 1% of the time on all fires that have been reported to them. That's amazing. I think most industry would love to have something that's that low of a liability, but that's not what everybody thinks. They think of the catastrophic fires and all the dangers associated with that envisionment. And then also on that burn plan requirement, there needs to be a burn no burn checklist. So after all that's said and done, even if you show up on site with all your people, all your equipment, things are, everything's in place, you still have to go through your checklist. And if not everything's checked as a go, TDA says for those certified and true prescribed burn managers, nope, you should not be burning, and you're more liable if you choose to proceed. So getting to the management side of things, that timing and seasonality of burns and weather, I'd say probably most common, at least over the last couple decades, if not longer, has been most people will do cool season burns. I'd say sometime, usually after that first freeze up until spring green up. And it's just easier to run a fire through vegetation when it's dry. We typically have lower humidities in the air, or the cooler, drier air. And quite frankly, it's a lot easier on personnel. Now those cool season burns, they have a lot of benefits, and they really have the ability to make a clean slate and set yourself up for a flush up, especially with the proper soil moisture, a flush up of that spring or summer vegetation. So it has the ability to really set yourself up well for warm season grasses and maybe even some flowers. A growing season, or that summer burn, those are different depending on the time of year. You may be burning with green grass, and yes, that's possible, especially if you have old material mixed in it, and depending on your humidity levels. One of the biggest benefits of those summer fires is that woody brush control. And whereas in the winter you still can run a fire through brush, sometimes even easier, but most of those plants, especially those that have defoliated and are they've gone dormant for the season as well, they've put their resources back into their roots. Whereas on those summer burns, those plants typically have their leaves, their fruit, etc., up above the ground. And so if you want to reduce that plant, be it mesquite or others, having or even prickly pear, having a hot fire run through there is going to be more detrimental to the resources they have above the ground. I will say another perk of summer burns is that typically we have more consistent wind directions. We may have higher humidities, but we more consistently have winds from the south or southeast here in the state, whereas in the winter we get a lot of those shifty northers. And so you have smaller time frames to really get a burn in if weather's finicky. But with those summer burns, it's also a lot more taxing on the volunteers that are there. And just all that heat with the 90 plus degree weather outside plus a fire, that can be dangerous. I want to definitely say that not all fuels are created equal. You have some fuels that are going to be trees that are going to be resprouters, meaning whether you burn them or you cut them, they're going to come back. And you got others that luckily aren't. You have some fuels that are what we consider volatile, meaning they have oils in their leaves, And so they're going to burn a whole lot differently, such as that McCartney rose or juniper, the cedars, or even Gulf cordgrass. Those are going to burn a whole lot differently than vegetation that does not have those oils. And so there's definitely considerations to take into effect on what kind of fuels you're burning in. What is those continuity of the fuels? Does it have a lot of leafy structure, or what's coined as 1 hour fuels, meaning after 1 hour of time, they're going to adjust to the current humidity levels, such as a grass, versus a log that's out there that may take 1,000+ hours to acclimate to the current conditions. How quickly does that fuel dry out? How easy is it to start and carry a fire? And what's its probability of ignition? And then you have different fuels and things to take into consideration, such as invasives or exotics. Bottom left, I have King Ranch Bluestem or KR Bluestem on there. That's a plant that, fortunately, unfortunately, loves fire. It's one of the first grasses to come back in the spring, and it has the ability to outcompete some of our native grasses if given a blank slate to do so. So, those considerations have to be taken in mind on, does it meet our management goals by having a fire? What time of year do we want to burn to best help a certain species, be it vegetation or wildlife? And do we have special considerations to take into effect based on the flammability of these species? Size consideration of the burns. It's already challenging enough to have a burn occur and to get all the ducks lined up, the weather, the personnel, the equipment, the allowances, etc. And so sometimes it's just easier to say, hey, we're going to get as much done as we can. But if we're truly managing with a particular management or a goal in mind, be it for a species such as quail or any other wildlife, or if we're doing it for our range management, let's say patch burn grazing, really need to consider, what is best for that species, and it's likely going to be more that mosaic or patchy pattern, be it 50 acres at a time or even a quarter acre at a time. It just takes a whole lot more effort because you have to prep those individual burn units, just like you would prep a big burn unit. But just really taking into consideration, what is the size of your unit? What is the shape? Typically, the simpler the shape, be it a square, rectangle, circle, is a whole lot easier than if you have one that looks like has a lot of fingers coming off of it and jags and different things, because each of those areas is going to be hard to know if you have, the wind working in your favor or against you, or, across from you, etc. And also, I will say, depending on the size of your unit and your communication ability, you get to a certain point, sometimes the equipment, especially if there's topography or thick vegetation, may have a hard time communicating with everybody you have on the fire. So that's very important to know, take all that into factor. I have fire behavior on here, but real simply, there's 3 things that go into fire. You have your weather, your fuel, and topography. And so just knowing each of those, that amount, the arrangement, what's needed for your prescription, what's forecasted, and more importantly, what's actually happening on site, how is that going to dictate your fire? There's a reason that there's a legal requirement to have at least 6 miles an hour of wind minimum in Texas. If you get any lighter than that, you start getting kind of shifty or non-existent winds, and then the fire is going to do what it wants to do and kind of go different directions. Whereas if you have a consistent steady wind, it's going to push it or pull it how you need it to. And so again, just different things like that. And then, once an area is burned, real simply put, once an area is black or burned, it's not going to burn again until there's fuel to burn. So using fire can be advantageous on setting up your black lines or preventing wildfires, and just being smart about how you approach accomplishing your burn units or your property management goals. When creating fire breaks, they can, the most ideal thing is bare mineral soil. That's not always the case, be it the topography, your equipment, your budget, but you can use things such as leaf blowers. You can use weed eaters. You can even use cattle trails, but the more prep work you put into your fire breaks, the less work you have to do during the fire to actually keep it contained and be safe, and vice versa. If you have a sloppy fire break or a vegetated fire break, you're going to have to spend a whole lot more time babysitting that or having water than you would otherwise. Equipment, there's a whole list of equipment we could go down, but really the basics, I like to tell people, you need something to have a controlled ignition. I'm showing a drip torch here. There's different apparatuses for that, but something that you can apply your fuel and keep it on the ground long enough to light your vegetation, and where you can turn it on and off. You need a way to collect weather on site. You need a way to suppress your fire, be it water or other means. You need a way to communicate with everybody. And if it's going to be a prescribed burn, you need a prescribed burn plan. And again, those are just minimums. As a land manager and landowner, a big question that comes up is liabilities. And yes, as the burn boss, and typically in Texas, you are the burn boss, unless you're contracting out a certified insured prescribed burn manager to do the fire. You, the land manager, landowner, the burn boss, you are liable for where that fire goes, be it, especially if it gets off your property. And you're also liable for the smoke. There's some recent laws that went into effect that has some protections for folks with smoke. If you follow a suite of different things within the law, but basically, if you smoke out a school, a nursing home, or a road, they're going to say, hey, did you do everything in your power where it was suggested not to happen, or were you negligent on it? So you're liable for smoke. You're liable for where that fire goes. So just, again, proper pre-planning, knowing those conditions, and then staying well communicated with your officials and with your neighbors is vitally important. And if and when a fire does get out, especially if it burns up some fence or burns pasture, let them know. It's a whole lot easier to get that resolved and fixed, right away, or, handshake method in the good old boy system as it is in a courtroom. So we talked about burning. Big thing, why do we want to burn? Well, simply put, fire is a great management tool for brush management. It's a great management tool for improving your forage quality for both your livestock and wildlife. You're able to diversify your ecosystems on how they come back, forbs and grasses, and change up that plant community structure. I got that wrong button. I mentioned earlier, even pest control. So to wrap up, I just wanted to say that there are a lot of resources available to you as the landowner. There is clicker's not working. There we go. There's a suite of research going on across the state, and this is just some of the ones that I'm aware of. I know there's more between universities, agencies, non-government organizations. A lot of research out there, publications on what they've learned and what kind of the do's and don'ts. There's different education and trainings and workshops, especially learning burns are the best. There's no better way to learn about fire than to physically be a part of one, actually to be a part of multiple. And because every fire you're going to be learning, no matter how many I've been on, I'm constantly learning something new. There's a lot of organizations and available assistance out there to help landowners knowing these rules, these regulations, the plans, how best to use fire as a management tool, and then even some of those available to help you physically be on the fire. And so just keep that in mind. You don't have to take all this on by yourself. And knowing that it's such a good practice and a necessary tool, a lot of organizations have funding available to help with that. Again, be it federal funds, state funds, or private funds that they have, that they just want that habitat to be enhanced. With equipment, it can be daunting to try to figure out and have all your own. but there are again resources available for that, be it your local soil and water conservation district office, your local natural resource professional. Talk to the ones I mentioned before. But a big one I want to bring to the attention is prescribed burn associations. Here's a map from what it was earlier this year. We've actually been fortunate to gain another prescribed burn association in the state, kind of east of San Antonio, and filling in that gap there in the south central Texas. And so we have a number of prescribed burn associations, and those stars there represent prescribed burn trailers that either those associations have or that other entities have, that landowners have the ability to use. Some of them have different circumstances than others, but those trailers are there with tools, be it sprayers, hand tools, drip torches, etc. So you don't have to have all those. And the best thing about that PBA or prescribed burn association model is neighbor helping neighbor. And you help them out when they need it. They help you out when you need it, and pulling your resources, time, and talents. So in wrapping up, important considerations: get involved with fire, volunteer, go see it for yourself, learn about it. And then if you get to the point where you're trying to figure it out for your property, set realistic goals and plan ahead. The best time to plan for the future is now. If in all reality, one of the biggest challenges we have of working with landowners, helping them burn, is making sure their fire breaks are ready to go, because we don't know when Mother Nature is going to give us the parameters and the conditions we need. So having fire breaks ready, having a plan in place, and having equipment ready to go is vital. And then use existing features, be it roads or ponds. Different things that are already there can be served as fire breaks, so you don't have to create new fire breaks all the time. So try to keep it simple and use existing things, so you're not having to blade or cut or scratch or blow new fire lines for the entire perimeter each and every time. And to continue on, again, fire is a necessary and vital component that our ecosystems have evolved with. Some are even dependent on it, and if they don't have it, those species decline, both vegetation and wildlife. Fire is an ecological reset tool, and it allows us to manage for those early successional habitats, again, those grasses and forbs. And the more often you burn, the easier and safer it's going to be to successfully burn. Those entry-level burns, may be a little patchy on their grass or may have brush, but the more often you do it and the more grass you do it, especially if you have a good return interval, it's going to be easier and easier to do each and every time. So with that, I want to say thank you. Here's a picture of my team members that I've been blessed to work with, learn from, and assist landowners with across the state. And there's my little girl last year when we burned our property for the first time. It's never too early to start burning. So.